All right, now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Andrea Saccamano with Guard Texas. Andrea is a valued member of the BOMA Greater Dallas Government Affairs Committee, and she's also been actively involved in both Texas BOMA and BOMA International, and is very engaged in the advocacy front. So I do want to remind you that today's coffee and chat will be recorded, so you can revisit the content or share it with your colleagues. If you have a question for Andrea or Crystal, please type it in the Q&A box. Andrea, take it away.
Awesome. Well, I just want to introduce Crystal and thank her for being here. The legislative session in 2021 was interesting, to say the least. So fortunately, we have Crystal here to tell us today what that means to commercial real estate in our industry. Specifically, Crystal will focus on redistricting, upcoming elections, the electricity update, the vaccine mandate, and much more. So again, just to echo Jeff, be sure to type your questions in the chat. We welcome them. Crystal is a public policy advisor for Lock Lord, a full service law firm that has earned a solid reputation for complex litigation, regulatory, and transaction work on behalf of clients across industries, including commercial real estate. Crystal has been with Lock Lord, a lobbyist for Texas BOMA, since 2016. That flew by fast. She's just been a huge help to all of us for a long time. So in 2021, Capital Inside ranked Crystal 58 in the state in its list of hired guns. In 2017, she was ranked number 6 on Capital Inside's Rising Star list. Capital Inside previously noted that Brown has a chance to become one of the most influential African-American lobbyists in Austin while working with Lock Lord. Prior to working with Lock Lord, she has served as chief of staff for Texas State Representative Carol Alvarado for 5 years and spent a year as committee clerk for the Texas House of Representatives House Committee of Public Health. She earned her JD degree from the University of Houston Law Center. And so let's welcome Crystal to talk about what happened in Austin this session.
Well, thank you, everyone. Good morning. Tuesday, actually today's election day for many of your local elections. There's about 8 state props that are on the ballot today. So I hope that y'all, looked at it and kind of, go out and vote. I always want to make sure I advocate for voting. But let's kind of talk about, as I like to call it, the sessions that never ended. I believe like last time I came and spoke with y'all, we were wrapping up the actual regular legislative session, and that was back in May 31st, which seems like 3 years ago because it's been so many sessions that's happened subsequently. And we had, it was a very contentious legislative session. And if y'all recall, it kind of ended on a kind of explosive note where the Texas Democrats actually walked out of the last few days of session to prevent the passage of a bill, the election integrity or voter suppression bill, depending on which side of position that you're on. They walked out saying because they just believed that the bill was a horrible bill that would disenfranchise a lot of people who are trying to vote, mainly people of color, to try to vote. So pretty much it caused a halt to the session, led to the governor vetoing Article 10, which funds the legislature, which not only just the legislator and their staff, but also any type of legislative agencies that are also help, like the Legislative Budget Board, that helps provide kind of like the financial help that they need to kind of say like kind of help craft the budget, or legislative counsel that actually writes the bills, and then anybody else that you can think of that just has some type of connection to the legislature. So it ended in a bang, and everybody was very clear that they were going to have to come back for a special session. The governor made it clear, hey, you walk out, I'll just call you back. And under the Constitution, he has the ability to call as many special sessions as he wants. They can only last for 30 days. But there's, and he could put anything on the agenda for members members to have to consider. So it's pretty much open season of what could actually be included on that agenda. So so let's take it kind of back from there and kind of work our way up to the current day. After, you know, the quorum break happened, after session ended, the governor pretty much said, y'all are coming back. And he said, we're going to start the first called special session on July 8th. And during that session, he put a number of issues on the agenda that included, of course, the restoring Article 10 funding, putting border security, election integrity so that they can get the voting bill back on, social media censorship, because there's been this big issue, especially in conservative circles, about the fact that big social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook are censoring a lot of speech that is occurring on their platforms, limiting student transgender athletes from participating in sports, more abortion related legislation. So this is kind to restrict the use of abortion inducing drugs, providing kind of a 13 check to retired teachers, banning critical race theory, and appropriating funding for property tax release, the foster care system, and cybersecurity. So as you can imagine, with the voting rights bill still, not voting rights, the voting of election integrity bill still on the agenda, many Democrats, they were not happy because the bill was not going to change or kind of lead to, or the communications were kind of frayed at that point in time. So Democrats still stayed away. They went to DC to try to advocate for federal passage, passage of federal legislation that would kind of deal with voting rights throughout the nation. So pretty much that session kind of became a bust because the House could never establish quorum. And for the House to be able to get any type of work done, you need to make sure that quorum has been established, which would be 100 members have to be in attendance. And as the makeup is, it's only 83 Republicans there. So they would definitely need some Democrats to come in attendance, and they were not able to get quorum to establish. So pretty much those 30 days passed. Nothing really happened. The Senate was still working, passing pretty much all the governor's priority items. But until the House was able to establish quorum, there could be no really action that really happened. So at the end of that session, the governor, as he promised before, said, I'm going to call you back. And he actually did. And he put those exact same items on the agenda, but he actually added additional items, some to kind of help be the carrot to kind of get some, hopefully, Democrats to come back to help make quorum so that they can get some of this legislation passed. And so during the second session, which began August 7th, the governor not only put all those items that were on the first session, but he also included funding for COVID-19 related healthcare expenses. Because if you can remember back in the summer, and we're still kind of dealing with it now, our COVID numbers, COVID hospitalization numbers were increasing drastically, especially with the Delta variant spreading around. So there was a lot of hospitals who were being overcrowded, who are having staffing issues. So, and we need more testing availability. So there was going to need to be some funding. So they added that onto the agenda. Well, the governor added onto the agenda. He also added expansion and kind of funding for virtual learning, especially what we found out during COVID. Since you couldn't really go into the classroom, there was going to be the opportunity that students are going to need help to make sure that they can still learn through, as we're doing now, Zoom or whatever type of virtual medium that they were using. And so wanted to make sure that we provide the funding and kind of the standards that are in place for that. They also included one that BOMA has actually been fighting for multiple sessions, that dealt with kind of preemption of kind of local employment ordinance. So if y'all recall, there was a big, and I believe it was in Dallas as well, a big push from different urban cities that were trying to make kind of paid sick leave ordinances. So that was one of the items that was included on the special session agenda. And then they also, were trying to do some, property tax relief again, because that's an issue that, many legislators, they want to kind of address or try to find some type of way to provide that relief. Unfortunately for us as Texas BOMA, many times they're talking more about the homeowner rather than talking about commercial buildings or commercial properties. So it's always kind of looking to see how that's going to impact what type of proposal or relief that the legislature comes up. So we're always kind of being vigilant of what type of relief or what type of proposals that they're trying to put out there to see how that's going to impact, commercial building owners and properties in general. So during the second special session, Democrats, they slowly were trickling back in, and the House was able to make quorum. So many of the governor's priorities ended up passing during that legislative session, especially the voting bill, which was the biggest contention, which was the biggest bill that kind of caused the Democrats to stay away. They ended up, passing that. People asked kind of like, did Dems get anything out of it? Of course, the bill ultimately passed, and there's multiple lawsuits that have been filed talking about how the bill is unconstitutional. But they were able to make some small concessions that were going to be different than what the original bill from the regular session was. So they did get that. When it came to our preemption bill, the ordinance preemption, employment ordinance preemption bill, that bill kind of died during the special because it kind of ran out of time. One thing about it, there's always, even though we kind of love the fact that if you just have kind of one kind of solid, state kind of policy, instead of these patchwork type of ordinances that are all over, especially when you have certain businesses that might do business in different cities or counties and stuff like that, it kind of helps you kind of have a little bit more predictability to have kind of one solid, rule of what is going to be the policy. But ultimately the bill did not pass. I highly expect that bill to be refiled again during the next regular session, and then to continue to work on that bill because it does continue to have massive support. It just always kind of falls at the end of the finish line because there is serious opposition to it, but it always kind of falls at the end of the finish line just because of everything else that kind of takes precedent over that issue. So if you can imagine, a lot of people thought that was going to be it. Second session, we're good. But the governor said, nope, you're going to come back for another one. Because what we needed to do is that we had two major issues that the legislature had to kind of deal with. One was redistricting, and I'll talk more about that after I kind of go into the third special. And then of course, during this whole entire COVID and with the federal dollars from the American Rescue Plan Act, Texas got $16 billion that they had to kind of figure out how they're going to spend it and how they're going to appropriate. That's massive amount of money. So what they did is they used this third session to make sure that those two issues were going to be on the agenda because they had to kind of deal with those issues. And then plus, because the governor has the authority to do so, he added additional items to be included on that third special session. So like I said, it'll be how we're going to appropriate that $16 billion. It will be redistricting because in the previous two sessions, the trans athlete bill for students never passed. That bill was going to be included. Vaccine mandates, because that was an issue that was kind of rising, whether at first it was kind of like, can local government entities require vaccine mandates? And if so, what kind of exceptions? Was a little bit more pushed out, kind of how should Texas kind of handle vaccine mandates? And then later on during the session, it came out with the governor making an executive order that prohibited any pretty much Texas entity, even if you're a private business, from requiring vaccine mandates. And I'll talk more about that later on. The governor also included enhancement of penalties related to the unlawful restraint of the dog. If y'all remember during the regular session, Abbott actually vetoed a bill that would enhance penalties if you kind of mistreat a dog. He got a lot of pushback for that, so he added that in there to make sure that he can address that issue, because that was I remember on Twitter, it was like trending Abbott hates dogs for a couple of days. They also made sure that there is additional property tax relief that was included onto the agenda because, again, property tax is always an issue that the legislature is working on every session, regardless whether it's special or regular. And then to do some additional bail reform legislation, increased penalties for illegal voting. There was concern that with the voting bill that they passed, that they lowered the penalty. So they wanted to kind of restore those penalties back for illegal voting. And then, of course, legislation to improve higher education. Because for last session was really supposed to be the higher ed session, but with COVID and everything else that was going on, higher ed kind of got pushed back. So he did add this to the special agenda to kind of address some kind of higher ed issues. So for BOMA's sake, let's kind of talk about the issues that probably either care or would impact y'all the most. One was the property tax. As I mentioned, most of the time when we're talking about property taxes, many of the members, they deal more with homeowners rather than the commercial buildings. So one of the good things is that we didn't get some kind of crazy commercial property tax or some appraisal caps or how we're going to do the equal uniform appraisal method, like kind of changing that kind of sense that could have a bad impact and be bills that that BOMA has always kind of fought against. We didn't have to deal with that. But this time, what we did do, the legislature, is they passed a bill that would kind of increase the homestead exemption on school taxes to $40,000. Right now, it's $25,000. It's estimated that that type of increased exemption will provide about $177 to the homeowner in their annual tax bill. That's going to be something that everybody's going to be voting on the May 2022 election ballot. So you will see that on there. There was a big debate going back and forth with the House and the Senate of how they're going to actually do property tax relief. At a certain point, the House wanted to take some of that federal funding, that ARPA funding that I talked about, the $16 billion. They wanted to use about $3 billion of that to kind of provide a $533 check to everybody who claims a homestead exemption in Texas, without, differentiating between your property values. Whereas the Senate wanted to provide $100 tax break for owners of, $300 homes and above, $300 homes. Those, they couldn't kind of come to agreement. So that's kind of what led them to say, hey, let's just raise the homestead exemption on school taxes and call it a day for right now. When it comes to vaccine mandates, it was kind of a late push in the end because the governor was getting serious pressure, especially about all these either businesses or local districts wanting to, local school districts or local government entities in general wanting to kind of push vaccine mandates. So of course he issued his executive order, but he also included it on the special session. And when he did, there was two bills that were kind of being considered during the legislature to kind of address vaccine mandates. One was HB 155 by Representative Tom Alderson. He's from Houston, a physician, and his bill would have required all entities to provide certain exemptions from vaccine mandate, and it would also created a private cause of action against businesses that did not properly comply. So he had his hearing. If you could imagine, there was a lot of opposition to the bill and a lot of uncertainty, especially with the fact that now you would create this kind of cause of action, allow an employee to sue an employer. And in Texas, that doesn't like kind of, it's a state that doesn't like a lot of lawsuits. That did not go over very well, but it was kind of a way of how can you make sure that you discourage or people kind of follow that. So they were trying to rework that bill, but due to the limited time, they really weren't able to. And it was kind of losing support as it was kind of being discussed and move along. Another bill that was being considered was SB 51. That was by Senator Brian Hughes. That would also include a required exemption from any vaccine mandate by a private business, and provide that any violation by a business could lead to an employment discrimination suit. So again, creating another private cause of action, which also caused very hard heartburn to many businesses on the fact that now we're dealing with possible lawsuits from that. His bill also would, and unlike the House bill, would also include a prohibition from like cities and counties and schools and universities from having vaccine mandates whereas the House one would just say you have to have these type of exemptions included. But because there was so much strong opposition, especially from the business community, neither one of the bills could actually make any type of movement. So right now where we're at is that the governor's executive order is still in effect. He has not rescinded it. And until he does, then it still plays. But our biggest issue now is that it kind of conflicts possibly with federal law right now, because I'm sure many of y'all are aware, but President Biden actually issued an executive order that one requires federal employees to make sure they're fully vaccinated by November 22nd. And then of course, federal contractors must be vaccinated by December 8th. And so his order kind of includes limited exceptions, pretty much objections based off of disability, medical condition, or sincerely held religious belief. Now, the issue of kind of how that might conflict, especially with the federal contractor piece, with the governor's executive order, is that his order includes some exemptions, but his will allow based off of personal conscience. So that means, what does that actually mean? And that's kind of could go beyond the scope of just a disability or your religious or a sincerely held religious belief or a certain medical condition. So there's kind of like this gray area of kind of where does that that kind of fall into. So most likely what's going to happen is that this will be something that will be kind of considered and determined through the course if we get to the point of where a business is actually sued about or a business lose money or something like that based off a contract that they have about which ones that they actually follow. There's also the federal government is coming up with kind of like Osha requirements for employers who have 100 employees or more. That one is going to require that employers to ensure employees get vaccinated or submit to a regular COVID-19 testing. So we're still waiting on the finalized rules for that from the federal government. We expect, the Biden administration has said they expect to release those rules by the end of this week, sometime this week. We'll see to find out exactly how they fall. But again, that could cause some type of problems, conflict with the governor's order, but most likely because of the fact that federal always trumps state. You pretty much follow the federal guidelines of what goes on, but we have to see kind of what exactly the rules say before we can make sure to see kind of where the conflict might actually be. And then for those who have under 100 employees, it's pretty much the governor's order that will be kind of covered, because OSHA, unless they have expanded it within the rules that they're going to come out, those rules wouldn't apply to the smaller businesses. So we kind of have to see one, what the federal government does say, and then two, kind of see how to move within the rules that are kind of in place. But ultimately, as I mentioned, it's probably going to all be determined by the court about, what actually stands. And if y'all recall, back in the summer, the governor issued a mask mandate prohibition, because there's a lot of, especially schools, that are trying to say you have to require mask mandates. And we really still never got a clear understanding on what exactly is the proper rule rolling, because we had a mixed bag of, some say the governor's executive order stands, the local governments can make their own decisions. So it's kind of been a mixed bag of everything. But what was kind of let out during one of those court hearings is that Governor Abbott and Attorney General Paxton, who has been defending or suing these entities or defending these lawsuits, pretty much said that they admitted in court that local district attorneys are the ones who have the authority to enforce these orders. So if you're thinking about, in Dallas, your DA, most likely, they're not going to enforce the governor's order. So it's been kind of said the governor's executive orders have been kind of meant to be meaningless, but we're still going to probably have to find out with the courts exactly what that final ruling is. I think mostly what you have seen is some businesses have said, like, we're just going to follow the federal rules, or we're just going to encourage. I think you've been kind of seeing all over the board of what they've decided to do. So it's kind of a wait and see type of moment, or kind of make the decision of what is the best decision for your business. Pretty much with the executive order, the penalty is $1,000 fine. There's no jail time, but a $1,000 fine. What's not clear within the executive order, or even in the law, is that just a one-time $1,000 fine? Is that a $1,000 fine per person who doesn't have one, or day that it goes? That's not clear. So there's a lot of ambiguity that's included with this executive order and this issue. So I wish I can provide the type of clarity that we need, but unlike, I should say, like many laws, there's always some type of issue that causes people confusion of actually how to do stuff correctly. So that's the vaccine mandate. And of course, if y'all have any additional questions, just, make sure you add them in the chat box, and I'll, expand on anything that might have not been clear. So redistricting, that was one of the main issues that the legislature has to come back for, because every 10 years there's a census. Y'all probably filled out the census yourselves, that you have to kind of figure out, like, hey, there's been a growing mass growth of population that's came to Texas. We were actually the state that got an additional 2 congressional seats, the most any other state did, just because there's been so much growth that's been happening in Texas. And so every 10 years, we have to draw the maps for the Texas Senate, Texas Representative, congressional maps, and the State Board of Education. For Texas, we had pretty much 95% of our growth that we received was due to people of color, with half of it being because of the Latino population. So we went from having a 36 to 38 congressional seat district. We are getting 2 new seats, one in Austin and one in Houston. The one in Houston has been kind of drawn to be more conservative leaning. The one in Austin, of course, has been more Democratic leaning. So we'll kind of see what happens. Right now, it's kind of a flurry of people deciding, like, hey, do I want to run for re-election? Do I want to retire? Do I want to either run for a higher seat, or do I want to even get in the race now that I've been drawn into this new district, or I see how, the different opportunities that could be, made. In Dallas, there's already talks that possibly Eddie Bernice Johnson, y'all congressman who's been there for, I don't know how many years, like 50 years. I might be exaggerating, but she's been there for a long time. She might be retiring. There's already been a flurry of people who want to go ahead and run in that seat, regardless if she's retiring or not. There's been many calls, so you might see some action that happens there. When it comes to the Texas House, so far we have about 16 members who have already announced that they're either retiring or going to be running for a different office. One of them includes a representative from Dallas, John Turner, and I expect we might even see more members. I don't know if it's from Dallas, but we should see more members. Typically after redistricting year, we see about 30, 35 members leave due to retirement, or because they lose a primary or general election. So we expect the 88th legislative session to look different when it comes to its makeup. Right now, the current makeup is 83-67, with 83 Republicans, 67 Democrats. After this redistricting, it's an expectation that there probably is going to be now 85 Republicans and 65 Democrats, based off of who kind of voted, based off the numbers from the 2020 election. In the Texas Senate, the biggest change that happened was that they redrew Tarrant County, so Senate District 10, that is currently represented by Senator Beverly Powell, who is a Democrat. They made that a lot more conservative. Before, it was just encompassed right in Tarrant County. Now it's a little bit more expanded. We have a state rep who's already said that he plans on running for that seat. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has already endorsed that candidate, so he's pretty much the front runner for that area. Most likely it's going to be a hard seat for her to keep, so we expect that to now change probably to Republican leaning. So the current makeup of the Senate is 18 Republicans, 13 Democrats. After the election, we expect it to be probably 19 Democrats and 12 Republicans. Senator Jane Nelson, who is currently chair of finance from Flower Mound. She is a long-term senator, and she has decided that this is it. She's ready to kind of hang up the towel, and she's did everything she wanted to do. She was the first serving woman, the first woman who served as Senate Finance Chair. And then also she did a lot of things with healthcare, started the CPRI, which is the Cancer Research Institute. That's kind of led to a lot of innovative cancer, innovations throughout the years of getting that funding for that program in Texas. It's kind of world renowned. So she will be missed, and it's a big shoes to fill of who's going to fill her position. And then of course the State Board of Education, it's a 15-member body. It's currently made up of 9 Republicans, 6 Democrats. Pretty much they made some type of tweaks, but it's pretty much the same. And then of course, as with everything, there's already been lawsuits filed on this redistricting map. One has been a federal lawsuit saying, could they even do it during this time? So we're still waiting on a ruling on that. And then of course, there's been lawsuits filed by MALDEF, which is the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, who said that these maps are intentionally discriminatory and violate the Voting Rights Act. We expect to see a lot more as the time flies by. Next, I'll kind of give y'all an update on electricity, kind of like the PUC. So if y'all recall during, well, everybody will remember this, in February, Texas probably pretty much blacked out. And during the last session, pretty much the legislature said we have to kind of make some type of changes. And so one of the main things they did is to make sure of kind of giving our agencies who have authority or regulatory authority over our electric and grid and our electric companies and, gas industries to kind of have a little bit more teeth. So they pretty much put a lot of rulemaking and power authority kind of in those agencies rather than making like explicit, prohibitions or prescriptive requirements in law when it deals with kind of how can we make sure that our grid is secure and how can we make sure that we are addressing, we can make sure that if another winter storm happens, we won't have a blackout that occurred. So one of the main things, of course, is that they said that you need to get weatherization of your facility, of equipment, to make sure that we don't have that type of blackout that happens. So whereas there was a lot of members who felt like we didn't do enough during session and they wanted to add it to the special session for us to deal with, that wasn't an issue that the governor was willing to add on, because he wanted to make sure it's like I gave the authority, the governor and the legislature gave the authority to the PUC, which regulates pretty much your utilities, and the Railroad Commission, which does more of the gas side, for them to kind of, put rulemaking into place so that now that these things can be followed, let's allow them to be able to do what they need to do. So right now, what we're seeing is that they're really just kind of in the middle of trying to find out and trying to create these rules and create new policy on how can we make sure that Texas is prepared for the next type of extreme weather condition, whether it's hot weather or whether it's cold weather. So the PUC recently adopted a rule to kind of better prepare for winter weather. Of course, the rule requires power plants to fix acute kind of issues that they saw from the winter storm, and then kind of use best efforts to ensure that the operation of their power plants and everything can withstand kind of these weather conditions. And this is kind of like their first plan. As we know, government doesn't move. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So they kind of move, at a slower pace, but they are working at the PUC to kind of come up with how can we better make sure better policies or better plans or rules in place to make sure that we're protected. They're also trying to just work on rules to kind of change of how the electricity market will function, so that when you're dealing with those high electricity bills that a lot of people, either because they were confused and bought into the incorrect plan, or the fact of auxiliary services went through the roof, or because the cap that they had in place of how high you can of how high that megawatt hourly cap could be on what you can set the price of electricity during those kind of maximized levels. they're trying to say like, what can we do to kind of change that? So they're right now kind of working on like, how can we revamp the system? So that's kind of a to be continued type of issue. And then also you have the Railroad Commission, who deals with kind of the gas utilities. They're trying to kind of come up with rules of how to make sure that they can withstand kind of these extreme weather conditions too. So I wish I could have some finite, like, great changes that are happening, but we're just in that position. I mean, that just in that time period of where we're just trying to, find out what is best practices, how can we prevent it, and like kind of move forward. So that's mainly what I was going to talk to you about this special. Again, there was a lot of chaos happening, but mainly the focus has been on kind of more so social issues or issues that work very well in the primary. Right now we have election day kind of like for local elections, but in 2022 will be when we have all of our statewide on the ballot. So that's our governor, lieutenant governor, AG, the commissioner, every statewide you can kind of think of. And then also our Texas senators and Texas representatives, as long as our Congress men and women will be on the ballot this time. So this will be a big midterm election in Texas. And so pretty much a lot of the items on the agenda, a lot of the policy that has been pushed. You'll even see members of kind of what they might even use this interim time to kind of focus on. We'll be focused on what are going to be kind of what we say primary topics, what is going to be good for the Republican primary, because since Republican state, it's pretty much a Republican primary that really kind of is the playground and playing field of determining who's actually most likely going to win either in the general or actually eventually be elected and serve in the next legislative session. So stay tuned. I'm sure we'll have another update on kind of what's been going on, because I highly expect there to be a lot of activity that happens with these elections these next couple of months, especially as we see more people retire, move. And then, as always, the governor can call a special session on anything, and he might decide to call a special session to deal with some issue that might be percolating right now. So I could take any questions that anybody has, or if y'all need me to expand on anything else that might have happened this session that never ended.
Yes, thank you, Crystal. There's a few questions that came across, so I'm just going to kind of go in order, if that's okay. Switching gears, I know we had talked a little bit last time about SB2, and some changes might be, some modifications maybe. So, so State Proposition 2, which is on today's ballot, gives counties the ability to pay back bonds by increasing property taxes. Would they still be limited on tax increases through SB2, or is this a loophole for SB2?
No, this is pretty much that Proposition 2 is pretty much just allowing counties to do what cities are already able to do. What the loophole that happened in SB2, that was just the disaster. When you have these kind of disaster declarations, does that include economic or physical disaster? That will be something totally separate that doesn't kind of touch on that. So we've already kind of dealt with clarifying that when we're talking about any type of disaster exemptions that could exist, they're only for physical. So that's already put in place. So that's two separate things.
Okay, perfect. Another one, State Proposition 8, which would exempt surviving spouses and soldiers who were killed or fatally injured in the line of duty. A wonderful proposition, but one is curious to know how it may impact property tax revenue and future tax rates to make up for the losses. Have they shared any data on that?
So I was trying to find some data on that. What I saw in an article that kind of looked at the analysis of it, they say that one is one that would not too many people would be eligible to apply for. So we shouldn't see that drastic of a change. That was the analysis that they provided. The other one, the 7, which I can't remember, that one is the one that it's kind of unknown of what type of effect that it would actually have, because we don't know how many people would try to claim. And I believe the other one is if you were a surviving spouse and your husband or wife, whoever was eligible for that exemption passed, then the spouse would still be able to get that exemption. And so that was kind of unclear of how many exactly that would apply to. And so to see what the amount would actually amount to, that one, they did not have the correct, in the analysis, they did not have the correct amount of what type of impact that they would include. I was trying to look for that exact number. I can forward you the article that I was reading so that y'all can see that.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah. And then one more, I kind of thought this as well, Amber. So to clarify, there's no timeline to expect any kind of established rules, or have they set any kind of even soft deadline for the rules about from the Railroad Commission for the focus on those changes? Anything there?
No, it's that. But I will say, especially with the PUC and the Rail Commission, they're having work groups. It seems like every other week, or regular work groups to kind of look at these type of proposals. But in the legislation, there wasn't an absolute date on when every industry has to have it kind of like set and ready. But knowing that there could be extreme weather next year, I would expect that the PUC and the Railroad Commission will be working to make sure that they are prepared and that they have the rules working, because they are moving along with trying to kind of come up to be what these rules can actually be. But an actual date, no. It's more of a wait and see, but I do see them moving stuff along because of the fact that is going. The worst thing that you want to do is be a governor or lieutenant governor or an elected official, and there's another blackout right in the middle of an election. So that's what tells me that I feel like they're going to be pushing to make sure something happens, to make sure that we have the protection, because you don't want something bad and everybody's like, oh my gosh, you're blacked out. Why do I need you as my elected? You're not helping. So I feel like we have just this artificial kind of deadline that's going to happen.
Unspoken rule.
Yes.
Well, thank you. That's all the questions that I see right now. So if anybody has anything else, I'll hand it back over to you, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you, Crystal. We really appreciate you taking the time to share these great updates with our membership. And we really thank Lock Lord for looking out for commercial real estate, not only in Dallas, but around our state. We're very lucky to have you guys as guardians of our industry and helping to make sure that our members and others in the industry, that we're taking care of. So just to remind you guys, this was recorded. So if you want to revisit anything that Crystal talked about, feel free to share the link. It'll be on our social media channels and in our newsletter on Friday, so you can watch the replay. And stay tuned for our next Coffee and Chat with Government Affairs. We'll start planning those out in 2022. We try to do these quarterly where you guys know what's going on. Obviously, we'll be out of a Texas legislative session next year. It'll probably shift more to federal and local. So just heads up on that. I do also want you guys to put this on your calendar. January 17th through 21st of 2022 is BOMA Greater Dallas Advocacy Week. And you may ask, what is that? So throughout that entire week, our Government Affairs Committee and our members will schedule meetings with local officials, including our mayors, city council members, and other key decision makers. And what we really just want to do is to connect with them, build relationships that will help, get laws and statutes that are beneficial to CRE. So we will be reaching out with you to more information on this, on how to get involved. And then lastly, obviously we're starting a new year. If any of you guys want to get involved with the committee, go to our BOMA website, join our committee wait list. We welcome certainly real estate getting involved, and we're a volunteer run organization with committees like GAC, and that is how we get things done. And we'd love to have you involved. So with that, I'm going to end our webinar and wish you guys a great rest of the day. And we will see you at the gala in a week and a half and at future BOMA events. So thank you guys. Take care.